Hello everyone and welcome to Void Dwarf Studios. It's been a while since we've really talked about dwarves, hasn't it? And I think it's about time that we got back to some good old-fashioned dwarviness. So today we are going to be discussing the Caridon Overlords, the steampunk ship-flying dwarves of Age of Sigmar, and quite frankly one of my favourite new additions to the franchise. I love these guys. I will always be a fan of the classic fantasy dwarf with a broad-bladed axe, but skyships is a pretty close second, third place, give or take, depending on my mood on the day. But this will be the intro video, so we will briefly go over the Caridon Overlords' history, how they came to be, where they started, what they're doing now, and just their general place in the Age of Sigmar world. So, way back in the beginning, when the dwarven gods Grugni and Grimnar were still alive, the dwarves were scattered across the various mortal realms. Don't ask me how, this is Age of Sigmar, they're just kinda there. It's possible they might have been survivors from the world that was. Unlikely. It's possible that the dwarven gods made them. Possible. But they're just kinda described as being there. Games Workshop doesn't really give a definitive answer one way or the other. But what we do know is that the dwarves originally were very much like the Warhammer Fantasy counterparts. You know, stocky, strong, resistant to magic, and with long memories, stout bodies, and a love of mining and, well, rocks. They built themselves various holds, many of them growing to magnificent sizes and wealth, and in the beginning things were okay. Then things went to hell in a handbasket, and Chaos Gods started screwing over the mortal realms with their demonic forces, led by Archaon, the Ever-Chosen, the ever-loving douchebag of the Chaos Gods. Now, the dwarves were not able to hold back these particular forces, and this is when the split began. Some dwarves became known as the Dispossessed. These are dwarves who have lost their holds and essentially are wandering bands of, well, gypsies, essentially. Although, for the various order factions, Dispossessed will come and assist and kind of act like an engineer corps of sorts. They are profoundly good diggers, very good at building fortifications, and they find work wherever they can and, well, harbour long old grudges of the homes they once had and are longing to one day recapture them, led by Warden Kings and, well, this is sort of the sorry, sad hangers-on of the old traditions. The Fire Slayers were the dwarves in the realm of fire who clung to Grimnir, and essentially they became the new warrior cult, and in a manner of speaking they hadn't changed much from their dispossessed counterparts. It's just that they were far more fanatical when it came to their worship of Grimnir, and, going forth and smacking things in the face with big axes, and, trying to bring him back. But I've discussed that in their own lore video, so if you want to learn more about Fire Slayers, go and have a look at that. The other variant were the Caridon Overlords, as they became known as. These are dwarves who, for various reasons, could not fight back against the various chaos hordes and giants. Our story starts in the realm of Shamon, where these dwarves have fled higher and higher into the mountains, fighting off giants, chaos monstrosities, and everything else that the realm could throw at them, and these dwarves were more technologically minded than their cousins. They were able to create, using a gaseous substance known as ether gold, to create flying ships that allowed them to, well, fly. And they created homes above the cloud which allowed them to escape from the various chaos hordes. And this new discovery of ether gold basically meant that the dwarves had a way to escape. They had a way to gain an advantage over their opponent. And these dwarves also, unlike their other two counterparts, decided to forsake their dwarven gods, believing that they were abandoned by their gods and that instead science, technology and ingenuity would be the new way forward. They are not exactly atheists. There are dwarven sky cities that do follow the dwarven gods, but it's not something that's actively encouraged. It's treated more as a superstition than an actual culturally accepted thing. And as the time went on, the dwarves became more and more adept at harvesting the ether gold, creating far larger vessels that allowed them to be safer up in the clouds, travel across the realm relatively safely in their large armoured vessels, Even Chaos Demons had a hard time puncturing through these things when they were filled to the brim with guns, cannons, and explosives. It doesn't matter how tough a Khorne demon is, if it's shot with a cannonball to the face, that tends to make it go by real fast. And these dwarven explorers decided to forsake their large two-handed hammers and axes for the most part, and instead put on various bodysuits that allowed them to operate in higher atmospheres, and also meant that they were armoured against some of the magical elements of their realm. And it also meant that they tended to wield weapons that were less complex to use on a narrow bridge. So instead of a big axe, they will tend to be using cutlasses, short hand axes, pistols, things that you can get out in a hurry and cut people down fast. They're not really heavily armoured, but that's the thing. The dwarves themselves are not keen on getting into close combat. They will do it because, well, close combat is very glorifying and all that jazz, but they much prefer blasting the opponent from a distance with all their high technological gizmos. And to be fair, I can't blame them. When you're on a skyship that is capable of blasting apart hordes of demons, yeah, I would choose to stay on board that ship too. But the thing that makes the Caridons much more different from their other two counterparts is the code. The code is essentially what stopped the dwarves from infighting and allowed them to operate relatively peacefully with one another. It is based on the idea that profit, trade, and plenty for all is the end goal. You never want to essentially make another clan of dwarves destitute, you always want to make the most amount of profit for the dwarven race. It is for this reason that some Caridon Overlord admirals or ships have been known to side with various factions if the gold is enough, and the dwarves are constantly looking for ether gold to continue powering their vessels. Because it typically exists in a cloud-like format, they are constantly searching for the stuff to make sure that their ships don't just, well, suddenly drop out of the sky. A very serious hazard, which the dwarves are very keen to make sure never happens. Which is why they are constantly searching for this gas. This gas, by the way, is rumoured by many that it was created by Grugni, the god of smithing and craft, as a way for his children to escape the worst of their horrors. However, he has certainly not told them this, or at the very least the Caridons don't believe this rumour, because, well, they have forsaken their own gods and, well, they decided science was the way forward. As Sigmar launched his Stormcast Eternals back into the fray, the Caridon Overlords began to open trade negotiations with the Stormcast Eternals, offering their various services, meaning that there was more cohesive fighting, and also a bountiful reward for the Caridon Overlords, who decided to fight alongside them. And since the coming of the Stormcast, the Caridon Overlords have spread to multiple realms, finding more sources of ether gold, which allows them to keep their ships flying, and also increases their profits and trade. Because whilst you could certainly take the axe away from the dwarf, you will never ever get rid of their love of shiny golden things. That's something that all three of the dwarven cultures can appreciate. In fact, funny amusing thing, it's mentioned in both the Fireslayer and Caridon Overlord books that the Dispossessed Fireslayers and Caridons once met together after a particularly grueling battle and celebrated. And there was an accidental drunken slip when one of the Fireslayers mentions the god Grimnir and how they're trying to bring him back by collecting the Urgold. This, rather than getting the Fireslayer rather sceptical looks from the Caridons, actually got them slightly excited, because there was a belief amongst many of the Caridon Overlords that the ether gold, that if they could bring their dwarven gods back, then this would allow them to have an extra leg up in the fight against chaos. And I've only mentioned two of the dwarven gods. There is a third, Valea, and we aren't really sure what happened to her. She's not really mentioned in the beginning of the world, but she's certainly mentioned by the dwarves. So she must have existed at some point, and the dwarves themselves are excited about the prospect of maybe bringing her back, or in some way bringing one of their gods back. There's even been rumours that Grugni has been making something secret in the mountains of Shamon, which the Caridon Overlords are eagerly trying to find, because whilst they may be sceptical about gods, anything that can give them the leg up against chaos and allow them to make more gold is certainly something worth doing. as I said, this is a very quick intro into the Caridon Overlords. They are by far one of my favourite dwarven factions, and yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into this, as we haven't talked about dwarves for a while, and I've been missing it. Anyway, I hope you've all enjoyed this little intro. Keep listening for the rest of the series, like and subscribe, and thank you all for listening. Take care, everyone.